media represent the world and thereby can try to shape it, indicating through inclusions and exclusions what is worth seeing and what is not worth seeing, what can be ignored without consequence. Yeah, that's, to the extent that media are conveying the world to us and we rely on the media for our knowledge of the world, these statements can be accepted, I suppose. Yeah. And the question then, which is implied by the text that you were assigned for today, caught in camera, what happens when the norms are violated? What do you do? How do you show it? Yeah. So this is a question about how do you, in a society that is where media are providing the information that is shared across the society, there is some massive violation of collective norms. How is that to be treated by the media? Is it to be ignored? Is it to be condemned? What is the response? Now we can, so the example that I've given to sort of start the discussion is the Christian Delage, caught in camera, which is the innovation in jurisprudence represented by the Nuremberg trials of 1945, where Justice Robert H. Jackson, a Supreme Court judge who was not a graduate of law school, incidentally, he had 1 year law education, but in those days it was possible for a non-lawyer to become Supreme Court judge. He made these two decisions. One was to bring motion picture evidence to show how unthinkable crimes had actually been committed. So the problem was how to convey things that nobody could believe. 6 million people killed, etc. How to convey this industrialization of genocide. The factory system of genocide that the Nazis had created, how to convey that. If you look at how Nazi Germany had dealt with this problem of, mass slaughter, they made it a secret. Maybe it was a public secret. Maybe everybody knew, but they should not show it. No photographs to be taken of it. The concentration camps were hidden within forest, Sachsenhausen, near Berlin, or outside Germany itself, Poland, other countries, where the maximum amount of deaths happened in concentration camps, not in Germany, to keep their hands pure. In fact, there is a statement by one of the Nazi leaders that the technology allows us to keep the souls of our soldiers pure while we at the same time purify our society. Okay, so technology became a kind of mechanism of denial. You achieve something, you are using the technology, but since it is a technology and not you, then you didn't do it. It was a clear mechanism of disavowal of agency. Yeah, that was the policy was spelt out by the Nazis. Yeah, and what it relied upon was that nobody should see it. Maybe you whisper about it. So when the Allies, and of course, during the entire World War II, there were talk about fake news. People who did not want America to go into the war, the pacifists, they were prepared to believe that there were no concentration camps. Justice Robert Jackson himself did not believe there were concentration camps. He said this is fake news. In order to get the United States into the war. But nobody can do such horrible things. And that was a widespread belief amongst people at the time. Yeah. There is another complication to the story, which is that they knew the railway lines, they knew that IBM was involved, they knew that other US companies were involved in the slaughter. They could have bombed the railway lines to prevent people from being transported. United States did not do that. If you go to the Holocaust Museum in Washington DC, all that information is provided actually. Yeah, so they are quite critical of the US government practice right there. It was opened during the Clinton era. Yeah, let's scroll back to the past. Michel Foucault, you may have heard of this text, Discipline and Punish. Yeah, it begins with this torture scene, 1757, a regicide, guy who had tried to kill the king. He was the public spectacle of his torture, right? And the gruesome torture that happened, and large crowds assembled for picnic to enjoy the spectacle, right? To enjoy the spectacle of committing violence against a criminal who had committed the gravest of crimes, which was to be a regicide. So Foucault asks, what happened? This is civilized Europe. What happened? 1757, by, within a few years, this is stamped out from memory. We can hardly believe that we are reading this. What happened? Can I pose that question to you? What do you think happened? Between 1757 and let's just say 1789, French Revolution, then democratization, something else happened. What was the process? What was the process that's happening here? Where violence can be public, can be celebrated as a tool of social regulation, and within a few decades, it is wiped out from memory. It's impolite to talk about it, right? Those who remember it are social embarrassment. Yeah, what happened between these two times? What's going on? Yeah.
Idea of pamphlets being distributed that make the person who's being tortured publicly a martyr. So the relationship between what is punishment and what is a hero and who is a martyr kind of changes. So I don't know if it's exactly
all related.
Yeah. All related.
The civilizing process. What happened essentially was, over a period, violence withdrew from public life and became secret. It became hidden behind high walls. It was no longer okay to show it as a public spectacle. Yeah, the civilizing process, which had many other aspects to it, in comportment, in dress, where you could wear your weapons, what kind of, table manners were appropriate, whole host of things that essentially withdrew any hint of violence from so-called polite life, civilized life. It was to be, but you cannot remove violence. Every society depends on, so it became secret. And that is where Michel Foucault goes to the panopticon. Says now a different method of social regulation arises where you are able to surveil, you are able to examine, you can control by surveilling, just by keeping your prisoner under total scrutiny, examining every move they make, making sure that they behave properly, they do not behave improperly, right? That's the panopticon, this new prison that he designed where everyone is subject to permanent surveillance. So this withdrawal of violence from public admissibility, it's no longer okay to admit the existence of violence. That is part of the development of a liberal society, you can say. It's this idea that we are all in a consensual relationship with each other, that we are not subject to coercion, it's free labor, I freely give you my labor, I sign a wage contract, you pay me the wage, I do the labor for you. Pure freedom. There is no feudal coercion that you have to, your children have to work, your grandchildren have to work, nothing like that. Right? Individuals are relating to each other in spontaneous harmony. That became the new way of understanding how society functioned. Yeah? And yes, we can say that many things happened, and when we look at it from a distance, can see that in this period, violence was okay. In some decades later, it was no longer okay. Many changes are happening that stimulated it. It's very hard to say what was the catalyst. Many catalysts, arguments. This idea of free trade was very important. Yeah, this idea of free trade, that China, for example, other countries, they are not opening their doors. We are not able to trade our goods. And so they built up a mythology about freedom and free trade, yeah, which went together with no violence. Your interest, my interest, they meet with each other. Your interest is served, my interest is served. Everybody is happy. Why are you preventing it? You are breaking a law of society. So I am justified in changing your attitude by any means necessary. Yeah, so this kind of, so that was 1900, the Opium Wars, etc. There is no category of media until the mid-20th century. So we ask, what is the media in the 18th century? What is the media in the 17th century? What is media? No media, the category arises as a proxy of American power in the mid-20th century. Before that, it does not exist. Nobody can think that all of information is coming through some portal that you can name and say, media is doing this, media is doing that. Such a thing did not exist. So that's the hardest thing to understand. We assume media must have been there from the Stone Age. Okay? Now we can talk about Plato, we can talk about the Republic, the allegory of the cave, important things to be said in that regard. Okay, but that would make our conversation too long if we don't have the time for it. Yeah, this is a quote from the book, from the text that we read, that they were hesitant to show the pictures and they celebrated their race, right? Aryan race is the greatest race, etc. But they could not communicate that very effectively through media, right? Of course, they had Leni Riefenstahl, they had, Triumph of the Will. There's one slide that I've got here of, Festival of Beauty of the Olympics. All these bodies in total alignment with each other, kind of a human machine with everyone doing their part, etc. But it did not do enough to cultivate this idea of Aryan supremacy. So the only recourse was to demonize the enemy, the Jewish people. Yeah, so that's what they did. This is what Siegfried Kracauer says. So initially, anti-Jewish activities were almost as taboo as concentration camps or sterilization. And this is a point Kracauer makes, quoted in Christian Delage. The image seems to be the last refuge of violated human dignity. That you cannot show violated human dignity on the, people, they're not able to absorb it. We have to ask today, in the wake of Gaza, whether that is still true. So there is an evolution, perhaps. We see Israeli soldiers broadcasting images of their destruction. So you should expect, dunya badalta rehta hai. What was there then is not there now. Things are, but that's still a valuable observation, that at one time you could not show images of atrocities without a backlash. Right? And I'll come to this again later. In essence, the cinematic narrative cannot harm human dignity without repudiating itself. But when you harm human dignity, you repudiate the cinematic narrative itself. Perhaps today we are at a time where, at least in some places, you can repudiate human dignity because they are not seen as human at all, which is, arguably the case for the Israeli attitude. Wanted to show you a bit of this, but I don't know if we have the time, and maybe I'll send it to you and you can see Justice Jackson's very stirring, very powerful opening address, the Nuremberg trial. And the point that Delage is making is that once you bring the media into the courtroom, the relationship between law and media is revealed to be a theatrical relationship. It is not a natural relationship. Every element of it is staged. Every aspect of judicial dignity, judicial power, jurisprudential status, all of that is a media phenomenon. You know, you climb many steps, you look up, the judge is sitting many feet above you, wearing these robes. In India, the High Court, a guy will be carrying a silver staff, thumping it on the floor. I mean, just many signs of there's no normal person, some very different kind of person. Yeah, and structuring the courtroom for maximum cinematic effect. Right. So here, the distinction between what is real and what is staged. What they find is that when it is staged, they get a more realistic effect. Okay, in other words, the distinction between real and artificial is being blurred to a great extent. It's about what you desire as reality. That becomes the guiding point here. Yeah, this is one of the very few photographs of actual killing of Nazis that we have. Just to say, very few images were made available. This is one of them. It is discussed in a book by Georges Didi Huberman, and he talks. The whole book is about basically 4 photographs. Here is another quote from Christian Delage about when they opened the gas chambers, what they saw. Yeah. And the point here is, one must imagine. This is the point, that what is the role of the imagination in conveying some idea of truth? Now, it has been said, seeing is believing. You know, that when you see it, it is true. But in fact, what we find is that there is a role of the imagination in building our sense of truth, which you cannot eliminate. In fact, when you imagine it, it is more powerful. When you see it, it banalizes, it trivializes, it brings in doubt. You know, whereas if you're able to imagine it, it can be infinitely more powerful. Yeah, so this is a question of art and artistic effect rather than naturalistic representation. Right? Now, this is what I wanted to sort of have a discussion about. Maybe we can do this after lunch. What examples can we find from India that are relevant? What I wanted to do was to ask you to break up into groups of 3 or 4 and to come up with maybe a couple of examples of events or incidents that you know have happened. Perhaps violence is the issue, but it is somehow inappropriate for it to be broadcast for some reason or other. And very often that is about context. In one context it's okay, in another context it's not okay. Yeah, and here I wanted to show you this picture. Well, it's just a 2-minute video. I'll play it, and that's something for you to think about. Yeah. No volume over? Basically, Kutubuddin Ansari is saying, I was very angry that this image had been taken, because when people saw it, it became so famous, nobody would give me a job. I became unemployable. Why did this photographer take the image and ruin my life? Yeah, so get a sense of the context there, because elsewhere it was seen as something else. Anji. I can send you the link. Maybe I'll do that. Yeah, they can watch it, and you have the. You can share the PPT with them. Yeah, this is slide number 21 or so. And what I found interesting was that the BBC reporter herself seemed clueless about this question of context. Yeah, so she is making him meet the photographer, and Ansari is extremely angry. He wants to shout at him, but then of course many years have passed. They become friendly here. Anyway, so I think we're not. Yeah. Okay. Well, I think we'll just turn it off since nothing is coming. All right. So we can reconvene for Q&A after lunch for a bit. Yeah.
I just want to go back to the first session, the morning session, when we're talking about the free flow of information, where in the UNESCO division was made. So at that time, in the right after the post-World War, the ideology was also attached to the communication, right? Where information comes before the production, and that has also been reflected into the Habermas philosophy of communicative practice. So when we are talking about here, the free flow of information was introduced here in the UNESCO. So was it just for the sharing of the intelligence, or what was the idea of state behind it, or the and what was the ideology attached to this?
Yeah, thank you. Very good question. Until probably the mid 1970s, from the post World War II period, from 40 onwards, there was an enormous enthusiasm about communication. If you look at the literature at the time, you find that even in Indian social science, communication was a buzzword. If you use it, then it's more sexy. Like media today, to some extent, you will find people bringing in the word communication where it's not doing much, it's not clarifying much, but it shows they are in tune with the times. That communication is the slogan of the age. Communication era. You have Norbert Wiener, the founder of cybernetics. This is the age of communication. Yeah. Now, in his book, Cybernetics, Norbert Wiener says, this is the age of communication and control. See, there is no communication without control. You need a control system. With the control system, you can communicate, but you must regulate. Otherwise, there is nothing going. Right? But the ideology of the time eliminated control and projected communication as if it could solve political problems. And here we can remember, this was the era of panic about another word which sounded very similar. It has the same word root, communism. Communism, communication, the same word, communicatio, Latin, participation, sharing, etc. Yeah? So, in retrospect, we can say it was a brilliant ideological tactic. If they were thinking that clearly, who knows, maybe it was an accident. I think they were very incisive. That by seizing on communication, they were saying something that the communists had no response to. The communists seem to be, in that domain, they seem to be backwards. In other domains, communists were the social justice, people's power, democratization, human rights. They were the ones. And the capitalists were the laggards. with this communication, they made it a weapon, and it was a very powerful weapon for them because there was a willingness to be optimistic that in the post-World War II era, we defeated fascism, and that was the good war. So everybody had to agree. Nazism is bad. We defeated the Nazis. We must be good. We are now in power. So there was a kind of domino effect, you can say, yeah, that conspired in rendering communication into a very powerful ideology.
It is not our ideology today. We are having doubts about it at a minimum. That we can see that it's not all good. That's creating problems. We don't know how to deal with those problems. But more communication is not the answer. I think that we understand. Yeah. So in a sense, this is a period marker. That was the age of unbridled communication. Now we're moving into some other era. There is a system. We can treat all things as part of a system. And if you do that, you can map information flows, you can map energy flows, you can map flows of power and regulate it. And so that kind of the flow chart, the diagram, it arrives from cybernetics and it comes into every field, from management to social science, every field, right? This idea that you can model and map human society through this diagram of flow of power, flow of information, flow of energy, regulate the inputs, modulate the outputs, deal with noise, that idea that you have a systemic idea that you can apply to the world, which requires both communication and control. By removing control, it was falsifying the picture, actually, falsifying the picture, right? Because they kept control for expert adjudication. It was not for popular consumption. If I had to say one catalyst, I would say it was fear of communism. Yeah, communication beat communism in a way, but the tremendous irony there because they have the same meaning, same word root, same, tremendous irony there.
Policy of glasnost, which is transparency, is almost trying to cope up with the idea of communication how to handle communism in a communication-driven world order.
In a world that had already been colonized by the American ideology of free flow, glasnost was sure to lead to the death of the Soviet Union, right? So that's the kind of irony that they had created a system where any country that resisted them should fall. Yeah, would be labeled as authoritarian, anti-democratic. They were on the hit list, so to say.
You made a very interesting point that when we are tracing the history of modern media, tracing American counterparts, so you said the allegory of cave Plato, all that we have to cover it, and then you said the origin could be traced back to mid 20th century.
Yeah.
So I have a question here because there are very popular newspapers like the Post, Washington Post,
Yeah.
Then New York Times.
Yeah.
So all of them, if you look at the founding date, it goes back to 1950s. So then why we are
19th century. I don't know what Post. New York Times 19th century.
So then why we are kind of you are taking position that you are starting it from mid 20th century, means almost 1950 post second.
No, but you're pointing to specific media. Yeah. But I'm saying the category of media
as something that can stand for society, that can stand for the world as a whole. That is a new thinking that comes up in the American century, so-called, which is post-World War II. Yeah. Until then, so Justice Jackson, the same Justice Jackson, gives a Supreme Court judgment where he says, every medium is a law unto itself. In other words, you cannot say media as if it has one law, one rule, one way of understanding. Not possible. Every medium is a law unto itself. Yeah. So that shows that this assumption we have that where is the media in the 16th century, where is it in the 10th century? No, no. It comes even after this Justice Jackson decision of 1940s. The 1936 Communication Act has been extensively discussed by different authors, Robert McChesney and others before him, Eric Barnow, yeah, that this was the last major battle to reserve part of the public airwaves for public use. Yeah, the public is the landlord, but they are being treated as tenants who have to pay high rent. That is the effective outcome of the kind of laws the United States has introduced, which is we will give the license, you have to watch these channels, and you have to spend 1/3 of your time watching advertisements. So that is the rent that you are paying, right? And opposed to that, there was an idea that we'll have public broadcasting, public education. Defeated. It was defeated 1936. Yeah, some false propaganda, this, that. So, in general, it is a business culture, right? That's not something, it's not aberrant from US history. Their politics has always been driven by business interests. And so, to the extent that communication is able to, as I said, by treating communication as a free entity, they were able to colonize the continent. And that served the government very well, because it was a white settler colonialism, which meant also it was racially divided. It was, all those assumptions were embedded in it. You look at Hollywood cinema, maybe until recently, if you saw a general scene in the city, urban cityscape, if you look very casually, you will think, oh, racially diverse, black, white, brown, all these colors. If you look closely, they are all white people. The play of color, light and shadow is being used to suggest that it's diverse, but it's not. Because the thought was that the sight of black people in large numbers will be offensive to the audience. And that was, I think, very influential in shaping American consciousness. You know, that black people suggest criminality, they're threat to law and order, they're dangerous, they're, you know. Now, it was not everybody's opinion. So, the 2008 election, when Obama, first African American, became president, who voted for Obama? It was the cities. So, it was the understanding that more liberal people are in the cities, suburbs, rural areas, Republican. They were able to use that, and Obama was able to be elected. But now we are seeing the backlash to that. Law is between fact and norm. Yeah? And media is between perception and reality. In that sense, law and media are structurally analogous or homologous. You know, what law is doing between fact and norm, media is doing between perception and reality. Now, none of these are fixed entities. Norms are changing, right? Norms are changing. First, violence could be celebrated if it was the right kind of violence. Then it had to go into secrecy, into hiding, because there was this idea that we are in a liberal society, no coercion, only consent, we can operate purely by consent. Clearly, today we are moving into another domain where violence is needed, and it is being worked out. How violence, where violence, for whom violence, what will be, you know, that's where we are, which is a question both of media and of law. It would be wrong to say, no, fix the media. No, it's a historical process. You know, it's a historical evolution here.